Salvate omnes, and welcome to week 3, Latin 101, fall 2023. Today we're going to look at chapter 3, Caput 3, and I think you'll see, beginning with this chapter, the organization and the beauty of Latin. In particular, we're going to start taking a look at second declension and how to see the inflected endings in second declension Latin nouns and adjectives so that we can better read Latin. So you'll definitely want to read through this. Again, if we were in a live classroom, we would take turns reading it aloud. But in this case, you'll have to do it on your own. As I mentioned several times, I'll say it again, I would read through the chapter and pay particular attention to the examples. And so you can see our topic is second declension nouns. English uses word order and Latin uses endings. So just as we had in the first declension, we had the I, autumn, is. Need to be memorized. Here, as you can see, we have the us, o, autumn, is. Again, with our macron indicating a long vowel. And you can see Wheelock does a real good job of giving you translations of these Latin words, and as we've said a couple of times, the ablative is definitely the most difficult just because it often functions as a prepositional phrase. So here in this case, amico magno is 2 words in Latin. You can see an English translation would be 4 words. So that's the challenge with the ablative, is you have to come up with these 2 missing words, in this case both the preposition and the indefinite article. If you are not completely comfortable with parts of speech, I do recommend, I think I mentioned before, English grammar for students of Latin. It's not too expensive on Amazon. It's a helpful reference, keeps things organized, because we are going to be referring to indirect objects or the dative, direct objects or the accusative subjects. And of course, all of this grammatical terminology is also indicated in your Wheelocks, but this is something that we need to get comfortable with in learning Latin. So let's take a look at, again, this is definitely worth pausing and absorbing and learning. And I want to go right to the examples, if I could please. Here again, just other examples. Maybe not in today's lesson, but at some point I will give a lesson on how to use a dictionary. Once again, words are organized and categorized by their endings. And I think I mentioned last time, when a word is of a particular declension, it will always be of that declension. So generally speaking, feminine nouns end in A. Here they have the word land. But if we use a word that we had in the last chapter, puella, or girl, it's always going to have an first declension ending. So it'd be puella, puellai, puellai, puellam, puelle, and so forth. Same thing with boy. In our current chapter, boy generally is masculine and will always be of the second declension. So in other words, a word will not in one sentence be first declension and another sentence or example second. It will always be systematized and organized by that declension ending. Let's see here. Here they're talking about the vocative. Once again, the vocative, even on this, you can see they don't have the vocative or the locative. So there are actually 7 cases in Latin, but these are the main ones just because the vocative and the locative tend to be intuitive. And because our book is based on classical sources, we don't have a lot of direct dialogue. So, for example, the vocative, when you're addressing or speaking to someone, that it would be in spoken Latin, since we're not doing spoken Latin, but reading Latin. That's another reason why the vocative tends not to be uh, indicated as much as it might otherwise be. And then often it's very intuitive as to what the meaning is. But they do have some, there is a brief sort of discussion of that on this page, which you certainly will want to read through. In a positive, again, we have some grammatical terminology here. A good example would be in English, Abraham Lincoln, comma, the 16th president of the United States, comma, served during the American Civil War. And so the appositive, which is set off by commas, is just giving other information about that noun. In this particular case, what's important is that this is in the accusative form, as we'll see, just because we need to have agreement in case and number and person with the noun that we're modifying. So more about that in a sentence, rather in a moment. We'll get to the examples. Word order, as you know, we're going to see it more and more. Generally speaking, English uses subject, verb, object, whereas Latin uses subject, object, verb. And so if we can remember that the verb will often be at the end, and then we can go back and read left to right as we do in English. As you know, some languages, the Etruscan language, for example, which was an ancient language along with Latin, actually did read right to left, and the Etruscans were on the Italian peninsula. But of course, Rome and Latin won the day, and hence why even in English, in most Western languages, we read left to right. I like these examples because they're going to make you become more comfortable with the word order. And you can see here the boy is giving the pretty girl a rose. This is a kind of an example we had in the previous chapter. Once again, Latin doesn't use do or does, is or are. And so dot can mean gives, is giving, or even does give. And so you have to kind of decide based on the context what would be the best. The most important point, and this is how I will grade it on your test, is to put it in the present tense, third person singular. And so, yes, there will be times where stylistically one may be preferred over the other, but the most important point is to get the right tense, present tense, the right person, third person, and the right number, singular. But you can see these are all possible examples of how to say this in Latin. The most common, I think, would be the first one, because we have the subject, indirect object, direct object, verb. But you can see you could also vary it here. The boy is giving a rose to the pretty girl, or the boy is giving a rose to the pretty girl, or the boy is giving a rose to the pretty girl. And so it all depends on the endings, as we'll see. Because AM, as you may recall, is the accusative direct object, and then AE is the indirect dative. So if we go back to our endings, so there's our AE for the dative. Again, only the context will tell you, does it mean to or of? Remember, dative is to or for whom. And so you have to kind of distinguish that based on the context. But there's our AM for the direct object. So read this and consider this. I think this is a good example of getting comfortable with the endings in Latin, how they change. And Latin uses endings, whereas English uses word order. Again, explained right there as well. So as you can see, we're going a little bit faster through this main introductory material because we've tried to explain that in previous lessons, the importance of reading through it, learning the vocabulary. Don't forget Whitaker's or not Whitaker's, but Wheelock's has a companion website, which I pointed out last time, which if you want to go there, it gives you some idea how to pronounce these. So I definitely would encourage you to do that. Once again, I have a Kindle version. That's why the vowels are a little bit funky. And then don't forget, please do the self-tutorial exercises as well. In fact, here's another mention of the website where you can find an audio recording of how to pronounce the words. And then, as I was noting, please do the self-tutorial exercises with the answers. And then, as always, if you have questions about any of this, which is explained here or in the self-tutorial exercises, feel free to email me or use the Blackboard discussion thread to post any questions that you have. This will be our last chapter before your first test. Next week will be a review week, which in one sense I'll just give you the week to review the first 3 chapters and to ask any questions about it. I will send out a sample test to give you some idea, but basically it's going to be vocabulary, the sententia antiquae, and one of the longer passages. Maybe some grammar, I haven't decided yet. But it'll be everything that we've seen in the book, generally. Most of what we do will be seen. That is the stuff that's covered in the Wheelocks, or that you should have covered in the self-tutorial exercises. The final exam may have an unseen translation, level appropriate, but we can talk about that when we do the final exam. All right, so here's our vocabulary, which does need to be memorized. Remember, your first test will have simple matching. So if you see sapientia, you need to match that with wisdom. I think we said a number of times that the word in italics, that's the translation. Sometimes it can be more than one translation, and so you'll have to use the context to clarify. And then all the words in parentheses, as we've said a number of times, are derivatives or words in English that come from that Latin word. Some remarks on how to read and translate, lectio and translatio. So take a look at that. Needless to say, learning a language is a skill, so it comes down to more practice than theory, and it's just getting comfortable with vocabulary and how to read it here. All right, let's get into our sententia antiquae, which is our ancient sentences, or you might even say Latin sayings or classical proverbs. Probably Latin sayings is probably better, just because some of these are not necessarily proverbs. Sententia, I think I mentioned last time, actually means a complete thought. So a sentence is a complete thought. And as you know by now, this book is based on ancient writers. So here we have the great Roman statesman Cicero, 106 BC to 43 BC. And we have De Vitis Amici de Populo Romano Cogitare. And here we start off with our verb. How do we know it's a verb? Because it ends in the second person plural. So if we go back to chapter 1 and take a look at our verb endings, our osmos tisnit. So debio, in fact, let me go ahead and just kind of go over that one more time. Is debio, D-E-B-E-O, is I ought or I should. Debes, es, is you ought or you should. Debet is he ought or he should or she should. And then debimus is we should or we ought. And then debitis is you all ought or you should. And then debent is they ought or they should. So we drop the ending and then we add our osmos tisnit. Don't forget, we probably it's going to take a while to learn these verbs. A lot of it right now is more just set vocabulary, if you will, but if we're not sure, we'll just look it up. And here's Whitaker's Words, which is a good tool for that. And you can see it says V, so that tells us it's a verb, versus N, which would be a noun. And then here it's actually a second conjugation, which we haven't talked too much about, but it's present active indicative second person plural. So again, this is that book I mentioned, English Grammar for Students of Latin. If you think this might be a source of confusion for you, you might want to get that book to improve your understanding of basic English grammar, so that when we refer to these terms, it'll be a little bit easier to comprehend. So go back to our example, is you ought. So you ought, my friends, to think about the Roman people. In fact, I probably should. Let me go ahead and do this for us as well, just to kind of make sure we have a record of this. We're doing Latin, so let me do Times New Roman. And we'll just call this Caput 3. And then we have our, oops, I don't want that. This is our Sententiae Antiquae. And we'll just go ahead and organize this a little bit better. So we have it. There we go. Close enough. And so here we have, so you ought, so that's the debitis. So we go back to the example here. Oops. You ought, my friends. Now, the my friends, this actually is in the vocative. We have to be able to recognize this is our new grammar point, second declension. But notice it ends in I with the macron. So amici is second declension nominative plural. So you can see amici, A-M-I-C-I, is the Latin there. So you can see it right there. And so we're going to translate that as, you could say friends. I'm going to say my friends, and I'm going to capitalize it because it seems like kind of a personal exhortation. But the Latin doesn't have the my. Latin generally will not use possessive adjectives. So my, your, his, her, and so you have to kind of put that in the context. But then we had in chapter 1, we had the infinitive. So here we have you ought or you should, my friends, and then cogitare means to think. It's where we get words like cognition. Maybe some of you are doing cognitive studies or neuroscience, something like that. And so here's our infinitive, cogitare. Once again, we have a dictionary in the back of the book, but if we're not sure, I think it's one of the nice things about Latin. It slows us down. Many of you are in STEM fields, and so it's important to be careful with your research, as you know. So we slow it down, we look it up. Once again, you can see that this has different options, but we haven't had passive yet, so you can just infer that this is present active infinitive. And once again, these are all possible translations. We're just going to go with think, because that one seems to make sense. So we go back to the examples that you ought, my friends, to think. So let's put that in there. So to think for the cogitare. And then we need to consider the other Latin words. De means about. So that's a preposition. It can also mean from, but in this case it means about. Once again, I'm not going to do this for all the words, but it's something you should certainly do, as I did once upon a time when I was first starting out in Latin. Is you can see it means about or from or away, of, concerning, according to, with regard to. So you have to go through these possibilities and choose the best one based on the context. I think about makes sense here. Why? Because it's about the Roman people. And when we use de, if we go back here, you can see it says ablative. So it's a preposition that uses the ablative. So this is one of the things that we talked about, the ablative being the trickiest case. And again, we're only in chapter 3, so just be patient. But when we use day, whatever word that follows needs to be in the ablative case. So if we go back to our declensions here, you can see populo romano both end in O. Why? Because second declension, which is the grammar topic in this chapter, second declension ablative singular is O. So you're thinking, oh, yes, oh. So you ought, my friends, to think about the Roman people. Again, Latin likes to put the adjective, in this case an adjectival noun, like American, French, German, that sort of thing, after the noun it's modifying, but I don't think that's too much of an issue. And so we put it all together, and our sentence reads, you ought, my friends, to think about the Roman people. Now, what does that even mean? Well, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean about patria or patriotism. Remember, Cicero was living in a time when the Roman Republic was in a state of decline and collapse, leading to the assassination of Julius Caesar and the rise of empire and Caesar Augustus and a new Pax Romana. And so the idea here is, to get people to think in a virtuous manner about the virtues of patriotism and republican virtues. Our next one here is by Horace. Horace is, we mentioned before, 65 BC. He was born, contemporary of Cicero. In fact, a lot of Rome's greatest writers are from the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, which is kind of interesting to think about. So Maecenas, as we'll see, was a rich nobleman who was a patron of the arts and also a friend of Caesar Augustus. But he supported, because this was a time when you could not support yourself independently. There was no copyright, no printing presses. The idea of being a privately published author of any kind, just wasn't. You couldn't be an individual back then. You needed other people to help you. Less individualism, in other words. So Maecenas is a person here. So names are sometimes hard to recognize, and in one sense, you just need somebody to tell you that it's a name or see it as indicated in a name in the reading. So Maecenas amicus Augusti mea numero amicorum habet. So Maecenas, a friend of Augustus, considers me one of his friends. Literally has me in the number of his friends, but this is one of the challenging things students over the years have somewhat struggled with, although I don't think it's that difficult. The literal translation is has me in the number of his friends. But clearly that would be a bad translation because that sounds non-standard in English usage. And again, I don't think we should be surprised that a language that existed 2,000 years ago is not going to be easily or readily translated into a modern language. And so you have to just be a little bit creative and improve your sense of English usage in order to translate these more effectively. At the same time, I will tend to describe the grammar literally so you can kind of follow. Because if we say, Maecenas, a friend of Augustus, considers me one of his friends, it may not be clear, well, how are you getting considers me one of his friends when you don't see, for example, consider, this doesn't mean consider, it means to have. And then where's one of, that doesn't seem to be here either. And so, well, that's because this is more of a question of phrasing, and this is how the Romans said it, whereas in English we say it, differently. All right, so with that said, let's take a look at the grammar here. So Maecenas, I'm just going to put that right there. Let's see, did I spell that correctly? I'm not sure. Let me check here. C-E, okay. Let me just get rid of that. And then a friend of Augustus. Again, this is Caesar Augustus, Octavian, nephew of Julius Caesar, who became the first emperor of Rome. Now, I want to focus on this amicus Augusti here. So amicus, that's the subject. So amicus Augusti. So here's a good example of a friend of Augustus. Amicus Augusti. Amicus Augusti. And as you can also see, it is in a positive, which we noted earlier in the lesson, because it's describing who this person is. So Maecenas, a friend of Augustus. Now habet, which we said is going to be the challenging part for translation, because it literally means has, but as good fortune would have it, here they have considers. So its most common usage, of course, is have. So for example, if you have a dog, canam habes, you have a dog, but you can also means to consider or to think, and has some other options as well. So we go back to the Latin is, I'm going to say considers. So I'm going to write that down. Now we're using present tense because, as you can see, habet is present tense. And at the same time, the verb is all the way at the end. And so unlike the first two chapters where they tended to keep the verb more towards the front or in the center, just to recognizing that most of us are native English speakers, here we're getting closer to what is more common in Latin, to put the verb at the end. This is just the direct object. And then here we have some more ablative in numero amicorum. So considers me, I'm going to go ahead and just write how I would translate it. Considers me one of his friends. I can type here. Let me be consistent. Actually, I don't think I need these here. Okay. Let's take a look at this grammar a little bit more closely. So here we have numero amicorum, and that is go back. So here we have these are both ablative. Actually, this is ablative, this is genitive. So in numero, that's going to be ablative singular. But then we have of his friends, that's the genitive plural. So this chapter is really letting loose, more so than the first two chapters, the different endings and how you have to navigate the endings, just being careful with your charts and your knowledge of your grammar. So in numero amicorum, so in numero ends in O, but here it ends in orum, because we need to learn the I, orum, is, us, I, o, I, orum, is, os, is. And then we have to be able to identify and recognize and read and translate effectively. So, yeah. So that one's that one right there. Again, maybe our most complex sentence to date, just because we have different endings here. Here we have as, us, I, o, orum, and then our verb there. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. Tres. I'm going to go to the next page here. So there's Maecenas right there, famous for his support of the arts. At the Palazzo dei Conservatori Roman, Italia. Tres. Libellus meos et sententiae meae vites viora monet. And this is from Phaedrus. Not quite as famous as some of the more famous Roman Latin writers, but still significant. And here, this is where we get the word library and also book, librum. But here it has a diminutive ending. It's where we get the word libel. And so we're going to translate it as little book. So libellos meos means my little book. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. I encourage you to do the same, just to as a placeholder. And then we go back, and then my little book, and I think we talked about last time, sententiae. I'll put this up again here. This could mean a number of things, and only the context will kind of tell you. It can mean opinion, feeling, way of thinking, thought, meaning, sentence. Here it is in the plural, so this is not nominative plural. How do we know that? Well, the context. So it is the subject, and sometimes the context can be difficult to discern. In this case, you're just going to have to trust your teacher, or professor, or somebody actually knows Latin. And through analysis, if you look at the Latin, we're not going to do that in this case, but if you went through the other cases, it just wouldn't make any sense. Plus, the verb is in the plural form, which tells us we have a compound noun. So my little book and my opinions and my opinions could mean thoughts too, but I'll go with opinions in this case. So my little book and my opinions. So here's a good example. Since libellos is nominative singular, we say libellos meos. But sententia ends in a, so it's feminine. So then we have sententiae mei. So let's just pause and absorb that, because we're not used to this in English. You may be asking yourself, well, how can we have a second declension noun, but then a first declension noun? Well, that's just how Latin works. And so you have to get comfortable with sort of difference and understanding that Latin doesn't use word order, it uses endings. And that's sort of one of the key aspects of Latin. But then monent, we had this word before in chapter 1, but if we forgot what it meant, we just look it up. And then could mean remind, advise, warn, teach, admonish. A lot of these would work. You just have to maybe choose one that fits your style of thinking. So teach, the vita. So here is vita, of course, is where we get the word life. So maybe some of you are putting together a curriculum vita. And so here it's the lives is probably how I would translate that. So, and then virorum is of men. So my little book and opinion, teach. Now, if we say teach, in English we might say teach about the lives of men, but I'm going to keep it literal just because we're in chapter 3 and I think this is still intelligible. Notice that Google doesn't like it, but all due respect, our language is better than Google. So my little book and my opinions teach lives of men. Maybe it likes the lives of men. Maybe see if that still doesn't like that, right? So it probably wants to say teach about. Oops, maybe there we go. Of men. My little book and my opinions teach the lives of men. Okay. Oh, maybe I had the preposition wrong. Probably did, yeah. So waking up here, it's early. So my little book and my opinions teach the lives of men. So let's take a look at this right here. Is teach the lives. So here we have vites. So this is new for us, a new ending. Here we have, because vita ends in a, so accusative plural first declension. So as, vites. But then we have of men. And so that is, if we go back to our Latin just to get it in our head here. So that's orum, O-R-U-M. So we'll go back to our ending here, O-R-U-M. So virorum. And so we put that all together is that right there. In fact, let me go ahead and just do like a little tutorial again, just to on live. So if I say vita est beata, that can mean life is beautiful, life is good, and so forth. But notice I'm using vita beata. So just do a quick tutorial just to get us comfortable with this. So here I'm using it as the subject. That's why it ends in A. But if I wanted to change it to something along the lines is how about this? Let me see. I'm trying to think on the spot here. Well, this is a little bit too abstract, but you get the point here. So here we have the beginning of life is beautiful. So again, not the best example. It's a little bit too abstract, but here we're changing it from the beginning of life. So like this is where we get the word like to initiate. So here we're using AE because we're saying of life. So we went from life to of life. And the point I'm trying to illustrate is, well, how do you know that it is? Well, here's a good example. So here we have vir orum, but here we have viri, and here we have virum. So how do we know it's O-R-U-M? And then here we have I, and then here we have U-M. Well, here we have I, U-M, orum, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate, less effectively than the book already has with its preset examples of Latin's all about just getting comfortable with different endings. And so for example, if I say, do vitae that means that I am giving beauty to life. So now we have the vitae, which also is the same as the genitive, of course, but now I'm saying I am giving beauty to life. But then if we say, I am living a happy life. So now we're using life and happy as the direct object. And so since I'm living this, it's the object of my living, that's why we're using AM. And so I gave the same illustration with the example of the ghosts last time, but that's sort of what we're dealing with here. So I'm gonna go ahead and erase that, but you'll see in the example of man in just a moment another kind of illustration of what I'm trying to illustrate. All right, let's take a look at number 4. Pauci viri sapientiae student. You are students, studious, and here it means to be studious means to be eager for something. You have to use the dative for this. So we'll see that AE is in the dative, as you'll see when we go through the example. Now, what does this mean? It says, few men are eager for wisdom. So I'm just going to put that out here. Are eager for wisdom. Remember, all our verbs are in the present tense. So that should help already. So few men, that is our pauci viri. Again, this is where we get words like paucity in English. If you're not sure, once again, just take time out to look it up. And you can see it means few, a small number, and see it can mean a lot of things. And so you have to be a little bit judicious based on context. But does mean few in this case. Now, viri ends in I, so that is our second declension nominative plural. The nominative is the subject, so that's why we have viri. So we put all together is we have few men, but then our verb is also in the third person plural, so that tells us this is the subject. And then we just have to follow the grammatical rule and use this as our indirect object in the dative, which we mentioned a moment ago is AE. So it's a quote by Cicero. So we put all together, few men are eager for wisdom. Number 5, Fortuna versa virum magnae sapientiae non terret. So here's by Horace. Literally, adverse fortune does not terrify a man of great wisdom, or does not scare, right? Or so let me go ahead and write that down. Now, of course, you're probably not going to be able to write down as quick as I am, but it's just easier in this video lesson just to write that down. So adverse fortune does not terrify a man of great wisdom. So this is a good one too, because it reminds us again, Latin doesn't use do or does. If you said adverse fortune terrifies not, that actually works. It sounds more like British English, to be honest with you, but that helps you, because this is one of the challenges, is that we have to add this extra word in English. So let's take a look at the example here. So we've mentioned several times Latin likes to put the adjective after the noun. Fortuna can mean fortune, happiness, luck, but here it ends in A, so that should give us some clue that it is the subject. Latin often does like to put the subject first as in English, so sort of keep that in mind. Even though the verb may be on the end, and even though Latin has different endings, we can probably oftentimes, at least for our purposes, believe that the first word or two is the subject. And then we confirm that by going through the sentence and then making sure the subject is in the nominative. So, in fact, that's an important point. Whatever the subject is, it must be in the nominative, because the nominative is the subject case. So this is just an adjective here, and we'll talk more about different adjective endings later. But so adverse fortune, and then non terret, does not terrify. That's where we get the word terrify. You could say scare too. And then terrify whom? Well, here's our virum. So we go to So there's our accusative direct object. So it does not terrify a virum, a man. That's where we get the word virtue. And then here we have the AE, which we said in the first video lesson this semester. Can be a little bit tricky, because how do you know if it's dative or genitive? Only the context. And so here you have to have a feel for things. Of great wisdom. So sapientiae magnae. And one of the nice things about the Wheelocks is it tends to repeat a lot of the vocabulary, which is going to help you. But it uses different endings, which also will help you. So again, you can see in this lesson, we're getting some longer sentences, more complex sentences. Now we have brought 2 cases into play. And so we have a lot more variety of endings to deal with here. By the way, this is where Latin is different than a modern language. A modern language, you wouldn't nearly have, like I teach German, you don't have dative until at the end of the first semester, maybe sometimes even, and genitives not till second semester, German, Spanish, or French. And so already you're going to get these very early in Latin. Why? Because Latin is largely reading, and so reading is grammar. And so unlike a modern language where you're speaking, the grammar is a lot slower to be introduced. Another example, difference between a modern English and Latin. A modern language, you look at the number of vocabulary words you have to learn each chapter. Ask some of your friends taking another language. It's probably 50, 70 words per chapter. Here you just have, 12 to 15 per chapter, maybe a little bit more. But modern language is all about vocab. Classical language is about thinking and being able to analyze and understand grammar. Think your way through problems. So it's good for the sciences. Let's see here. So I think we explained that one. Sometimes you can move around the word order, but I think we'll stick with that one right there. Okay, moving on here. We're making progress. We only have 11 to do. So, Simon, which is someone's name, so we'll use that right there. It says proper name. A man of great fame or great reputation has great benevolence. So let me go ahead and write that down. So Simon, a man of great reputation, has great, magnanimity or benevolence. Yeah, like I said, it's early still. So great benevolence. Edwards, what is benevolence? Kindness, goodwill. So let's think about this right here. So Simon, vir magnae famae. So vir is the nominative form of man. So it's the subject, again, being used as a positive. And again, if we're not sure, we have to look it up. So here it is, man, nominative, noun. But then the tricky part again is the AE ending, because AE could be one of these endings here. Only the context will tell you. But here is a man of great reputation. Fama can mean rumor, reputation, fame. Again, just choose one. I'm going to go with reputation. A man of great reputation, and then has, great benevolence. Of course, in English, you might say is very kind, but literally has great benevolence. So notice the magnam benevolentiam both end in am. Why? Because they are both being used in the accusative, indicating the direct object, first declension ending. So am, accusative is the direct object because it is what he has. Number 7, septem. Semper avros eget. Eget means to be in need. And so avros here is being used, more poetically. So a greedy man. A greedy man is always in need. By Horace. It's like King Midas. You cannot satiate your lust for gold. So, and so a greedy man is always semper in need. In fact, this is a good example we talked about in our first lesson, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words in English. Latin only has 3. And so that's one of the challenges in Latin, even for me still, more advanced Latin. I'm doing Virgil right now, AP Latin, and it's tricky because it seems like there's a lot of words missing, and a lot of times in Latin you don't know what it is until you go through it. And so that one is that right there. Again, avros is second declension nominative. So that's our subject. Semper is just an adjective, or excuse me, adverb always. And then the book gives us what this means here. So, acto nulla copia pecuniae averum virum satiat. So no amount of money satisfies a greedy man. So let me put that up here. No amount of money satisfies a greedy man. Let's take a look at this here. So nulla copia, that is our subject. How do we know that? Because Latin tends to put the subject first, as in English, and it ends in A. And the context and subject-verb agreement will confirm that. But then we have of money, which is a little bit tricky. Pecuniae, again, only the context, and so you have to kind of follow the lesson here for a little confidence, perhaps. So of money, because it wouldn't make any sense, no amount to money. It doesn't make any sense. No amount for money, also ungrammatical. So of, genitive generally means of. So no amount of money, and then satya is where we get the word satisfies. And then here we have our accusative direct object, avrum virum, satisfies a greedy man. And so there's our for avrum virum, or virum avrum, and that's our direct object. And Seneca, Stoic philosopher, tutor of Nero, before he himself, like Socrates, was executed. All right, novem pecunia avrum irritat non satiat. So money, so here we have excites. So we're going to go with one. You can either go with excites or exasperates. Just choose one. Money excites greed. It does not satisfy. This one's a little bit trickier. So what does it mean that probably in English says that money never satisfies a greedy man, but that's kind of a loose translation. I would avoid loose translations at this point. So your translation may be a little wooden, but that's okay. So money excites avarice, does not satisfy. So maybe money does not satisfy, but excites avarice. But the problem with that is we don't have said or but. So this one's a little bit tricky to translate, but the meaning is clear enough. I mean, ultimately, if you think about it, Romans, we're not translating, but creating meaning. So translation is somewhat artificial in one sense, not perfect. So we're just going to do a literal translation. Money excites avarice. So money, excites greed or avarice, yeah. And then probably have to put a colon in there, but change the punctuation is that it does not satisfy. So literally not satisfies. So there's a good example where the satyat actually is it because it's third person singular. So number 9 is a good one because it's probably making some of you think about Latin, and probably some of you are probably uncomfortable with this, and that's a good thing. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not really learning anything. And so, but it's just the nature of a lot of times that when you go from one language to another, there's no perfect translation. The important thing is to understand it, which I think the meaning is clear enough, but trying to translate it without modifying the Latin for the sake of English grammar is difficult. But if I were to give a better translation, beyond that, I would just say money never satisfies, but only excites greed. But again, that's sort of adding some words in the English translation that are not in the Latin, but that's the sense of it. All right, number 10. Admone is the imperative. You had that in chapter 1. Laude is the imperative also in chapter 1. So what does it say here? Admone means to admonish, also a verb in chapter 1. So this vocabulary should look familiar. Admonish your friends secretly, praise them openly. In other words, don't criticize them in public, but praise them in public. Don't make people feel bad in public. It's another way to think about that one. So let's go with that one. Is admonish. What does admonish mean? You know, to correct them if they do something wrong. So admonish your friends secretly. And then let's see, what was the, and then they did have a semicolon here. So, and then praise them openly. So the second clause doesn't have them, but we're going to go with them, of course, is friends. So amicos is sort of implied in the second clause. Secretly is our adverb. Again, if you don't know that, you can look it up on Whitaker's Words. So there it is, adverb. Where is it at? Right here. Yeah, secretly, privately, hiddenly. Actually, this one doesn't give us that precise translation, but that is the way to translate it. And here, amicos is our direct object, second declension, accusative plural, so os, so amicos. So that tells us that friends is plural direct object. And so we put it all together, we're led to that translation. And the last one is we ought to hold moderation. This is kind of another way of the golden mean, is we ought to hold moderation to avoid different extremes. Of course, in English, you might say is that we ought to be moderate in our actions, something like that, but that's a little bit too abstract for the ancient world. Is we ought to hold moderation is the literal translation. So demimus, we ought, and then to hold is tenere, you can see right here, and then moderation. All right. I'm actually going to assign this as homework. And again, let's be honest, the challenge with this is if you just go to Google Translate and throw it in there, yeah, it's going to give you probably a pretty good translation, but you probably didn't learn as much as you could. So, you're going to have to, take your time and go through this. So we have the agricole et vitam et fortunam nautae saepe laudet, nautam magnam fortunam et vitam poetae saepe laudet. Et poeta vitam et agros agricolae laudat sine philosophia averi viris de pecunia semper cogitant, multam pecuniam habent, sed nihil virum avrum satiat. Let's see, I will do the first sentence for us, and then, like I said, assign the rest as homework. And this is the grass is always, greener. And this is by Horace. We mentioned several times, important writer. This is from his satires, which they give you some more information about that as well as some vocabulary. And it's really about the simple life, if you will. One way to read Horace is kind of the contrast between the simple life and the city life, and the virtues of living a simple life versus the power structures that often are in play in politics and public life. So go ahead and just center that for us as well. And okay. So we have here agricole et vitam et fortunam nautae saepe laudat. So I'll do this first clause for you, and then you'll do the rest as homework. So it means the farmer often praises both the life and fortune of the sailor. Let me write that there. So, oops, I don't need the bold anymore. I'm going to actually say happiness, as I'll explain in a second. It has a colon there. So, and let's take a look at this. So agricola is our subject. It's where we get the word agriculture. How do we know it's the subject? Well, Latin often puts the subject first. If we're not sure about that, we'll just go ahead and look it up here. So agricola, you can see first, farmer, cultivator, and so forth. Let's see, did I put in the accusative form? There we go. Okay. Typo there. So yeah, so it's the nominative singular of the first declension. So we go back and ends in A. Words that end in A tend to be first declension. And you can see here it means farmer. Could mean gardener, but in this case, let's go with farmer. Simple life. But then we have the et, which I think our book points out is going to be used or translated as both and. So just if you see that conjunctive pairing, just remember to translate it as both and. So we go back to our reading here. Is the farmer often praises, so type is an adverb, so we can look that up if we're not sure. And then laudat, where we get the word, we had this in chapter 1, it's where we get word like laudatory or applaud, but it is in the third person singular. So laudo is I praise, laudes is you praise, laudat is he praises or she praises, laudemus we praise, lauditis you all praise, and laudant they praise. Again, verbs are a little bit trickier to explain in this format than nouns. That isn't, but really the first part of the book is focusing on nouns. Verbs would be more Latin 102. So if it ends in os multisna, if it ends in t, it's third person singular, and then just whatever the word means. But then here we have am. Why? Because that is the direct object. So this is the object of the farmer's praise. So am, both the life and now fortunam, as I was saying a moment ago, could, oops, I could type here. Fortunam can mean chance, luck, fate, prosperity, condition, wealth, property, but it also can mean happiness. But if you want to go, I don't think it means fate. If you want to say prosperity, that would work too. But actually, happiness is actually another meaning of it. Just doesn't have it there, but we can put prosperity in here. And then sype is often, and so, but then we have of the sailor. Why? Because genitive is of. So this is AE, because if we look at our endings here, genitive, first declension is AE. Remember, only the context will help you with that. But it wouldn't make any sense to say the farmer often praises both in life and prosperity for the sailor or to the sailor. That doesn't make any sense. And so of the sailor is how to read it. So this first clause right here, this first part of the sentence, there's a lot going on. It's once again probably our most complex sentence to date, just because we have am, ae, and then we have some other words that also may need to be reviewed. And so I think this clause illustrates the importance of getting comfortable in learning the Latin noun declension endings. All right, so I'm going to assign the rest as homework, and then you'll send that to me for a grade. And the rest of definitely read the rest of the chapter. It's kind of just kind of some general notes on the importance of Latin in a general sense. But that's it, and then you'll see. Then we move on to chapter 4 after the first test.